Tell me your name, the office you are seeking, and then answer the following question. What do you think are the most important solutions at the federal level to address sea level rise and flooding? Take it away.
I'm Todd Truax. I'm a candidate for the U.S. House of Representatives, 19th Congressional District. I've been here 20 years, up and down the Orange River, the Caloosahatchee River, Imperial River, Gordon River on my canoe. I care about the environment a great deal. I was at the march for so many marches, but this one was the death march for the river in Caloosahatchee, downtown Fort Myers just a few days ago. I carried the coffin. I'm concerned about the water. I'm very concerned about the environment and the animals and the flora and fauna caught between the green algae and the red tide. And some of the things we can do from the federal level is address the effluence of cow manure coming down the Kissimmee River into Lake Okeechobee. That's contributed to all the nitrates and phosphates that are adding to that algal bloom. I'm a healthcare guy, not a scientist, but I'm learning about these things. And so that is being flushed into the waters of Stewart and the waters of Fort Myers. And that's affecting us all over from the southwest coast. So we can affect legislation to use that manure instead of letting it run down into Lake Okeechobee, and using that as fertilizer rather than the phosphates and nitrates. So we can't outlaw or ban those use of fertilizers for the golf courses, our lawns, and our gated communities, and I'm guilty of one of those. So I got 10 seconds, and that's all I can do in 10 seconds.
Awesome.
Good evening. My name is David Holden. I'm a Democrat running for Congress in the 19th District to replace Francis Rooney. If you want to see our future here, just look across the state to the East Coast. They call it nuisance flooding, but it's more than a nuisance if you're trapped in your home and you can't get to school, to work, or to critical medical appointments. We squandered 20 years on solving the problems of the Everglades. We can't afford to waste 1 minute on sea level rise and climate change. This administration has sold out to the climate denial industry. Scott Pruitt. They've scraped data, science data from the EPA website. They've slashed budgets and repealed critical environmental regulations. But over at the Pentagon, that bastion of liberalism, they've been preparing for climate change for 2 decades because they understand that we've got at least 18 military bases under threat from sea level rise, and that climate change is a national security problem. What can we do on the federal level? A lot if we have a seat at the table. We can acknowledge that climate change is real. We can insist that climate change and sea level rise be part of all federal agency planning, and we can ensure a steady stream of funding to research, plan, and implement sea level and climate change solutions. What we can't afford is 2 more years of Francis Rooney and a Republican Congress.
I'm Pete Pollard. I'm a write-in Republican. I'm running for Congress in the 19th District. That is not Francis Rooney's seat. That's our seat, and we'll decide who gets to sit there. To answer the question, we need to first stop denying that climate change is a fact. We need a science-based approach to policy. We need to fully fund the EPA at the federal level and at the state level. There must be more cooperation. There must be full cooperation between those 2 agencies. We're all in this together. We're all going to drown together. We're all going to see our environment die together if we do not act together. I'm running as a write-in candidate because I am very unhappy with the Republican Party. If I'm elected, I will not hesitate across party lines to do what I think is right for the people of the 19th District and for the United States. I'm a native Floridian. My family has been here since 1842. I have now lost everything I loved. This river is dying, and I want to put a stop to it.
Well, expanding on some of the things that just got brought up, I'm going to pull a question from our previous round from the audience, because I think that the audience went to the trouble to get here. We need to ask as many of their questions as we can. So I'm going to ask, this question was for the state candidates, but I think it also applies federally. Who in the state or in Congress or in the US government can we partner with to get cleanup to happen faster down here? For Congress, can we borrow Department of Defense and energy experts for help?
But I'm not sure I understand the question.
The question is, how can we look to the Department of Defense and energy experts for help on the federal level and bring them down into the state?
I don't think it's necessary. We know what needs to be done. We need to build this, not build a reservoir, but acquire the sugar lands. We need to direct the flow onto the sugar lands. We need to get that water flowing, not actually south. It needs to go flow more to the southwest, which is its historic route. Should enter into Shark River Slough and enter into the Gulf of Mexico just north of Cape Sable. We don't need the feds for this. We know what needs to be done. Florida has already accumulated the money to do it. The governor needs to exercise eminent domain, take that land, and get the water onto it. There's already existing around Lake Okeechobee the Rim Canal, and I don't know how many other floodgates there are. We can move that water in a controlled fashion that does not destroy the homes of the 50,000 people that live there. We can put that onto the sugar lands without flooding the Everglades with toxic water, without running dirty water into Florida Bay. And we need to be reminded, or to remember, that the two primary pollutants we're dealing with are two macro elements that all green plants need: nitrogen and phosphorus. If you put that onto the sugarcane fields, you'll have a huge bloom. It might not have the sugar content that the growers would like to make it a marketable product, but it will most assuredly clean up the water.
So I think what I understand of the question is, how do we treat this emergency as an emergency? And we've seen, when the Congress and the administration wants to take action quickly, like a $1.5 trillion tax cut for the ultra-rich, they move pretty quickly. I think that took about 48 hours from the time they released the bill to it being passed and signed by the president. So we know that Congress and the administration can move quickly when they need to. It's getting the federal government to treat this crisis as what it is: a national crisis, a national threat, not only to our national security, but to our way of life, to our health, to our ability to prosper. Drawing experts, the ones that haven't been driven out of this administration, from the Department of Energy and the Department of Defense, I think that's a great idea. But we also have to remember there are political realities here. So when we win the House, and hopefully the Senate in November, in January, we will still not have wisdom emanating from the White House. So it's going to be a long process. But what we can do is immediately stop the repeal of environmental regulations, and we can implement oversight of the executive branch, which we have failed 100% to see out of this Congress. And that's a critical constitutional function of the House, and that indeed will start on January 3rd.
So all hands on deck is the question. The Department of Defense and
Asking about the Department of Defense and other federal resources.
other federal resources. Well, again, unless we get that blue wave to come, we're going to continue to have the red and the green waves, and that sludge and that toxic buildup. You can see what 8 years of Mr. Scott's legislation has done is that neglected the fact that people couldn't even say climate change that worked for the state government. It was stripped from all websites, and all scientific data was just thrown to the hills. And then with the EPA right now, Mr. Pruitt's legacy, there's another lifting of restrictions for clean water. The Clean Water Act was lifted by Mr. Rooney. So if we don't bring that blue wave, we're not going to have blue waters again. We're going to continue to see this algal bloom and the red tide for year after year after year, as we have been. We need to stop using those phosphates and nitrates for fertilizing our golf courses, our lawns, our gated communities, you name it. And we also need to stop using those things for the sugar farmers. If they don't have access to that, and we start using that cow waste that I was just talking about, and we inject that into the ground 6 inches so that we can fertilize our tomatoes and our peppers and everything else, That's one solution, instead of spreading the phosphates and nitrates across the top layer and just letting it wash down in the Okeechobee. With all the rain that we have, we could flush the system out and have clean water in 4 years. All we have to do is stop adding waste into that water, and then we'll have the clean water that we need.
According to Flood IQ data, sea level rise plus a hurricane category 3 would cause flooding-related damage in 1,661,558 homes, approximately, in the state of Florida in 2018. The question is, what can we do to protect these areas? What can we start doing now to protect them?
Well, when you're in a hole and you want to get out of it, stop digging. That's where you start. So one of the many aspects of this problem is overdevelopment. In Lee County, I think over the last 4 years, of something like 2,800 development projects that were put through the county system, 4 were declined, and those for technical reasons. So when you develop land and you remove ground cover, you steal the ability of the land to handle water and storms and floods naturally. So we need to look at how are we going to maintain the quality of life for the people who live in this beautiful state and who enjoy all the beauty we have when we don't have a toxic algae bloom and a red tide for months upon months upon months. And I think we have to start by limiting how we develop, to develop more smartly, to ensure, as they said earlier in the evening, that we preserve wetlands and open spaces, and that's something that we simply have not been willing to do. Now, that may not be a federal issue, but one of the things that a member of Congress has is a microphone and can bring attention and bring together federal, state, and local authorities to work together on some of these issues.
Okay, I guess I'm next. Federally, what can we do to address the issues? We talked about this yesterday, so it feels like a rehash. But I can do repeats. The water issue is such that we need to have the infrastructure to build up our roadways and our sewer systems and have pumping stations that are solar powered for when the power does go out. Because we know we've had hurricanes and we've had this backup of our sewer systems. We've had roads that are flooded, so we need to add to the seawalls and along all the canals and the rivers, because the water's coming. We know the water's coming. The only thing we can do is slow it down by burning less fossil fuels. And so the only way we can afford all of those things and that infrastructure and create all kinds of jobs is by focusing on the tax structure that we have right now. Currently, the tax structure that was passed by Mr. Rooney gives that $1.5 trillion to the top 1% of 1% of our population. When already 3 people in the United States have as much money as the bottom half of the United States. So if we want to focus on building up our infrastructure and creating jobs and strengthening our reserves for when the next hurricane comes, because it's coming, then we have to focus on that tax structure and catch the money from the hedge fund folks that are using all these pass-throughs and the tax plan that lets them slip through the cracks without paying their fair share. And so that's why I have a fast tax plan. It's on my website. It's called Fair Automatic Simple Tax, and everybody pays their fair share. And wouldn't you know, everybody in this room would wind up paying less if you get those corporations that pay 0% to pay at least 6%.
The question again?
I forgot. I'm kidding. According to Flood IQ data, sea level rise plus a hurricane category 3 would cause flooding-related damage in 1.6 million homes in Florida in 2018. That's this year, if that happened, if we did have a category 3 flood hurricane. What can we do now to protect those areas that would be vulnerable and more vulnerable due to sea level rise?
2018, nothing. This hurricane season, this flood season is almost over. But I hear 2 questions here. What can we do about sea level rise? Nothing. We're going to lose that. That's not man-made. That's a natural cycle. It's a 1,200 year, 120,000 year, recurring cycle. The sea level is going to rise. We're not going to beat it. We're going to have to leave. It's going to involve a human migration. I think we should start immediately when people file a flood claim. we need to offer to buy them out, let them leave if they're willing to leave. Have to set the limits on how much we can pay. As far as hurricanes, if we don't have the infrastructure in to handle that now, it's probably too late. Refitting homes and streets for Cat 3 flood is just cost prohibitive. We're going to have to hunker down. You have to make your decision, either leave 5 days before the storm gets here, or hunker down and deal with the consequences. But we're in it now. There's nothing to be done.
Let me just do a real quick fire on sea level rise and climate change. I want to just have everybody quickly let me know what you think is, or let the group of us here know, what you think is causing climate change. Do you think that human activity is speeding it up?
I think climate change is primarily natural. The highest estimate I've heard of man-made, of human activity increasing temperatures and sea level rise is about 5% of the increase. So it's coming, no matter what we do. I don't say that we shouldn't do what we can to slow it down, to stop adding our 5% to it, but it's coming. We're gonna have to deal with it, and that's gonna be a mass migration.
Okay, I'm going to have to respectfully disagree with Mr. Pollard. I think the science is pretty clear that yes, there are cycles to this, but it is primarily a man-made, human-made problem in both climate change and sea level rise. The data is pretty clear from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution to today, and even more scary is the acceleration of the rate of change.
Ditto. Yeah, we're doing it. It's us. We're adding to it. We're melting the glaciers in Antarctica. We're melting the glaciers in Greenland, and all of that extra water that was on land is coming to our seas. And that seawater is hotter, and so the seawater, when it gets hot, it expands. And so we're going to have those rising tides. And the only thing we can do to slow it down, because we can't stop it necessarily, at least nobody's come up with an idea yet, is to stop burning fossil fuel and stop drilling for oil. That wasn't for me.
No.
Stop drilling for, digging for coal, which, my father dug for coal for a lot of years. And so he found something else to do. We managed water out in California. So there's other jobs to do besides digging for coal and digging for oil and digging for those natural gas things. Because the more we release that carbon into the air, the hotter the greenhouse gases are going to get, and the hotter the seas are going to get, and more snow is going to melt. So we need to address those things, and we can do something about it.
So let me follow up that question with the following question. I just go back down the line. When you get to Washington, let's all assume everybody happy rosy ending. If each of you, if you get to Washington D.C., how are you going to sell the people up there on the fact that climate change does exist and that you do believe that human activity is accelerating it? How are you going to get your opponents on board?
How am I going to get my opponents on board? Am I a salesman? I'm not a slick salesman. My last name's Truax, so I rhyme it with the facts. And so that's how I argue with anybody. I present them with the facts. Here's the data. Here's the science. Here's the evidence to support my argument. And a lot of folks make their decisions by how they feel. And so if I can appeal to their feelings and their emotions, then I'll do that as well and support it with the facts. And that's how I convince folks. I think that agreement is already there as far as what the cause of the climate change is, but folks are funded by their benefactors or their donors to their campaigns, and those are the folks that they answer to more than the voters. And so campaign finance reform is another way to convince folks to pay attention to their voters rather than to their donors. And so that's what's one of the key things that we need to focus on when I get to DC, January 3rd. And swear in, is focus on campaign finance reform. Because if we don't focus on campaign finance reform, we'll see the Koch brothers still calling the shots. We'll see all those big donors still calling the shots. And they really need to answer to us. And I need to answer to you, because you hold the vote, and that's what matters. And that's what we should be answering to.
So, something I've done throughout my life, no matter where I've been or what organizations I've been involved with, is building collaborations across boundaries to solve critical problems. So we're going to have to do that here. And the honest answer is it's not going to happen immediately, and it's not going to happen quickly, because there are a lot of folks invested in the fantasy that climate change is a hoax, or it's not as bad as it's being presented, or we're overreacting, or it affects our way of life. The fact is, the climate change will affect our way of life, and we're all going to have to change in order to survive. There's no question that corruption of the system is a critical part of the problem. When the Koch brothers pledged $400 million on this election in 2018, it's not for the benefit of anybody in this room. Right? When people donate to my campaign, they are reported who they are, what they do for a living, where they live. We've got, since Citizens United, an unregulated wave, billions upon billions upon billions of dollars of dark money. We don't know who's donating it. We don't know where it's being spent. So, not just on the climate issue, but on so many critical issues of healthcare and justice and the future of this country, we have to get at the money underlying the system on both the campaign finance side and on the lobbying side.
I'm not going to wait till I get to Congress. I'm doing it now. I'm running a write-in based campaign with no money whatsoever. I have not asked anyone for money. I will not accept any money. The incidental expenses that are involved with this, I can come out of my own pocket. If lightning should strike, I'm the underdog's underdog. No one has seriously thinks I'm going to get elected and sent to Congress. If I do, if that happens, that sends a shockwave through the whole process. It says to the Koch brothers that you really can't buy the republic. The only thing that allows that to happen is freedom of access to the internet. Now we're looking at a loss of free access to the internet. We need to reverse that. We need to make very, very certain that no one ever shuts down our ability to speak to each other anytime we want. I do what is politically called canvassing. I do it online. It costs nothing. And that, if I were elected, that would frighten the entire political hierarchy.
Well, since we brought up the subject of campaign finance, I don't know if it's appropriate to ask, but how are your campaigns being financed? You just mentioned yours. I just wanted to ask are you taking donations from large groups or organizations, or how are you getting yourself backed?
My campaign is funded by individuals and families. I take no money from corporations. I will take no money from corporate PACs or the NRA. We've raised money in 25 states because that's how progressives are getting elected. And we raise money the old-fashioned way. We ask everyone who loves us, everyone we've ever met. We reach out through email. We have house parties. People host us. If folks feel like we offer something, then they may consider donating to our campaign. We've also used the internet. We've done a great job. That's how we haven't been to 25 states, but through Facebook and other avenues, we've been able to raise money. So Francis Rooney spent $5 million, $3 of it his own, the rest from his rich friends, against a Democrat who spent less than $30,000. That Democrat got almost 35% of the vote. So we are not that far away from winning the seat. We're not going to outspend him, and we don't need to. What we need to do is get the record, Francis Rooney's record, and our proposals in front of the voters, and we think that will allow us to win this election.
It's awkward to ask anybody about where they're getting their money, but
Let's talk about money. Why not? Let's talk about all kinds of fun things. My campaign started from my 401k. I didn't want to ask anybody else for money unless I felt I was in it myself, 100%. I sold off jewelry, I sold off coins, I said whatever, I did whatever I could to fund the campaign. I took a year off without pay. That's how I gave to the campaign. Before I asked for anybody for $10 or half an hour of time. Some folks, Mr. Holden, I have to disagree with you. I say Medicare for all because there's nobody behind me saying, don't say Medicare for all. Mr. Holden's taking money from folks with Kaiser
That is
Permanente.
absolutely not true,
Kaiser
Todd.
Permanente is listed on the website. And so he won't say Medicare for all and because he's taking money from his insurance company.
Excuse me, you're lying.
Well, it's the facts. It's online. It's there. You
Todd,
donate.
if you can't understand an FEC report,
I see
you
it.
should
I
understand.
submit the FEC report.
Really? Okay.
Well,
So
you-
I have a donor who works for Kaiser Permanente,
Okay.
who is a personal friend. I support Medicare for all, Todd. Why don't you learn the
That's
facts?
the first time I've heard you say it out loud.
Really? You ought to
2 weeks
listen.
before the
You
primary.
ought to listen, Todd.
This is on your time?
I don't know whose time that was.
That's,
But
I had it on your.
the rest of my money is mostly from in-state and a family member from Colorado. So my money is from folks that I know here in Southwest Florida, not from 21 states. My time's up.
okay, next question. Does the EPA or Congress have authority to mandate reducing discharges into Lake Okeechobee and buying sugar land under Clean Water Act or health threat? Can we litigate for relief if necessary? Do you see this becoming a problem that goes all the way to the federal government where they can take that eminent domain, use eminent domain to get that land? Can the federal government do that?
You want to go?
Yeah,
There you go.
sure. Eminent domain's a part of the Constitution. There's no problem with that. I think it's an interesting thing. One of the Supreme Court justices, maybe it was Holmes, said something to the effect that you can't take a man's land, but you can take a little if you don't take too much. So it's always, eminent domain is always an interesting question, but I don't think there's any question here that this is a health hazard. If we don't do something, people are going to die. If we don't do something, the mangroves are going to die. They can't tolerate the amount of fresh water that they're being drowned in. All the fish are dead. The turtles are dead. The crabs are dead. There's a picture on the internet this morning of a little baby turtle laying in the surf. I never saw that before in my life. I've been beachcombing for 50 years. Not even a crab to scavenge this thing. We have the money in state. We have the power in state. We should do it. If the state refuses, then absolutely the federal government should step in and do that. Flood the sugar lands. That's simple.
I'm not sure what the federal ability is to do eminent domain, but I know the state certainly has that authority. We had a deal under Governor Christ to buy all of the sugar land, but they didn't pull the trigger. They walked away after the recession. We're going to have to get creative. Hopefully we're going to have a Democratic governor who will start to reclaim our former glory as a leader on environmentalism in Florida. But if not, we should think about a class action suit. That's certainly something that the people of this state, and certainly in southern Florida, should consider, because our health is affected every single day. And it's important that people understand the power of the sugar industry. This is one of the few industries that not only gets subsidized with our public money, with our tax dollars to grow sugar, they also have tariff protection. So it's a complete misuse of the tariff power to limit outside competition. So we pay enormously inflated prices for sugar. Not that we should be eating as much sugar as we do as a people. And they use that money not to invest in cleaner technology, not to give more pay to their workers, but to buy politicians in Tallahassee and in Washington. That's one of the reasons we're not taking any money from corporate PACs. And until we break that power, nothing's going to change. Until we elect different policymakers, our policies won't change.
And so they're dumping their water, their dirty water that's full of phosphates and nitrates onto the Florida land, and then we're pumping it back, that dirty water back into Lake Okeechobee. And so that is owned by Florida. We have to just rescind that lease and say no more. We funded already the money to buy the land. Instead, that money was used for administrative purposes. The land was not purchased, and the expansion of Lake Okeechobee, or at least the watershed, the creation of the watershed, was not done per the voters' wishes. There's a lot of times we vote for something, and then somehow it's not done in Tallahassee. And in Washington, D.C., what we can do, we saw the Army Corps of Engineers was here in Cape Coral, and they said all they can do is control the spigot. They can turn the flow off or on, and that's all they do. They make sure the dike is maintained so that we don't have another catastrophic flood where 2,000 to 3,000 people die if the dike were to fail. And so that's the sole purpose of the Army Corps of Engineers. What goes into that water is the state's responsibility, and how the state allows that water to be polluted is, again, the state's responsibility. And so if they're not doing anything about it, and they're letting this unbridled development continue, and no checks on the septic tanks, and no abatement of this flow of phosphates, then we're stuck with what we got.
The next question comes from the audience, and it came from the previous round, but I want to ask, what would you do to help the most vulnerable people in floodplains in the face of sea level rise? What kind of programs do you think that you could put into effect that would help people that are most vulnerable, that don't really have the money to recover?
I don't know how many of us were here, were at the Tidal Town Hall last night, but I heard something incredibly disturbing from several of the candidates for county office, which was that the market's going to decide what happens. That's pretty harsh, right? Not all the people that live in the floodplains or on the coast are in multi-million-dollar mansions. It's many people who have their entire retirement and life savings tied up in their home. So I think we're going to have to create federal programs that allow people to leave their homes and relocate as and when that becomes necessary, without losing their life savings and their investment into their homes. That's something that the federal government can do. We can't just leave it up to the market, and we can't just leave it up to chance. Who's the last person to buy the property before the insurance companies pulled out? That seems like a very cruel game of musical chairs.
Market has no conscience. Market does not care. As people, we can care. The federal government is not limited in its ability to generate revenue, to raise revenue. Our monetary system, our tax system is very poorly understood. When Nixon changed it, took us off the gold standard in 71, went right over everybody's head. We don't tax and spend. We spend first, and then we tax to remove money from the system. The market will determine who can live here. Those who can't, we need to buy them out, possibly with something above market value, because we have the money to do it. We can afford to do anything we want to do, and it's the humane thing to do. But the market's going to rule. The question is, how do we deal with the fallout from the human fallout from that market? And I say we deal with it as humanely as possible, regardless of the cost.
We saw this problem in Bonita. I live in Bonita Springs, and I'm on the board for the Cafe of Life, and we do what we can to help feed folks, the migrants, and different folks in the community. And what we wound up doing after Hurricane Irma flooded out a great big part of Bonita Springs, folks that were in trailer homes or in migrant camps or in low-lying homes, FEMA says $33,000, that's it. Some folks with a trailer home that's 50 years old, that's more than it's worth, but they had no other place to go. So we worked with quite a few different charities, Love Inc., and some other church-based organizations to rehab trailers. We gutted the floor out because it turned into a graham cracker floor, and we put in new kitchens if we had, it was all donated labor, donated materials, whatever we can do to chip in, we paid for the general contractor. That was what our charity could do. And we have to pull together. But what we have to stop doing is building in these DRGRs, or along the DRGR, the designated resource groundwater, what's that, the last R, I always forget. Recovery area, that's what it is, the DRGR. So what we've got way too many folks that are still building along the creeks and streams and rivers that really shouldn't be there. And we don't want to encourage that. But to buy them all out and pay top dollar would not be feasible. What we can do is stop allowing that growth and development along the waterways, and then also not give people permits to rebuild in those areas that are flood prone. I don't know about you guys, but I don't feel so great about funding beach renourishment when we can't use the beach then afterwards.
The next question is from the audience. It says, what would you do to help climate change deniers in Congress see the benefits of making changes which would mitigate climate change? For example, jobs, economic gains, etc., to get the United States back together with the rest of the world to reduce emissions to...
Can I? I'm sorry, again.
What would you do to help climate change deniers in Congress see the benefits of making changes which could mitigate climate change? For example, jobs, economic gains. What kind of things could you present to these climate change deniers to get the United States to join the world on the Paris Climate Accord, things like that?
Nothing. One of the infuriating things about human nature is once people make up their minds and invest an emotion in it, they will not change their minds. Have to drive right over the top of them politically. Have to gather the votes to make climate change a reality. We have to push them out of the way. They're not going to be persuaded. We have to, I believe that all politics is local. We have to, in rooms like this, convince each other that climate change is real. And if somebody in Congress doesn't want to accept that, then that person needs to go. They take up golf. Maybe they go pick up dead fish on the beach. But they need to be run out of public service. There's no dealing with those people.
Okay, I am not quite that pessimistic. Now, it is true, studies on neuroscience show that once we have taken a strong position, it's very hard for people to change. But you don't change people's points of view by attacking them. You change people's points of view by getting to know them, by listening to their concerns, by developing a relationship. And to a great extent, I think we can do that because these issues don't affect just blue districts. They affect every district in this country. But there is the political reality. The days when we've been able to work across party lines to achieve great goals, as we did in the civil rights movement, as we did in the environmental movement in the 60s and 70s, are, I hope, on pause. But for us to make the kind of changes that everybody in this room knows are essential, we need a Democratic Congress and we need a Democratic partner in the White House. And to do that, we're going to have to work very hard. As I said earlier, there are some things we can do right away. We can stop the damage, some of the damage from getting worse. But ultimately, we're going to need to elect people who agree that science is real and that the threat is real and that we have to work together, which I know we can, because there has never been a problem in this country that united we have not been able to overcome. We just have to find the people who are willing to have that fight with us.
The question is convincing folks that climate change is real. It is easier when there's more folks along with you to share that same vision. And so that blue wave does help make that easier. As far as convincing folks, again, you give them the facts, and what I've done, and it's helped bring a lot of folks that were Trump supporters and had that Trump bumper sticker and had the Trump sign in their yard to my campaign, is you understand and you share with them, you understand that they fell for a con. And you recognize that he's a great con artist and that he led a great movement to a bunch of suckers, basically. And so once you've shared that everybody falls for a con, or everyone's taken advantage of from time to time, or everyone's a sucker for a deal and then that deal was not so great, then you can reconsider what moves you make next. If you have that shared reciprocity, then folks feel that you're along with them. And that's how you convince them, that you take that time to listen with them and look to the facts and make your decisions and regroup. If I fall for a deal and it wasn't a great deal and the product was faulty and I got it cheap and it's my own fault for buying it cheap and not buying it for full price, and you get what you pay for sometimes. And so that's how we're going to bring those folks over to our side, by just sitting down, listening with them, and coming up together with a plan how we can make things different. I got 10 seconds. Time to.
Okay. Here's another question. This one is from Rethink Energy Florida. How does renewable energy relate to sea level rise? And what, if anything, should be done to promote renewable energy in Florida and throughout the United States?
Renewable energy, we talked about that yesterday too. Geothermal, in my little HOA where I had a condo in Fort Myers, we used geothermal energy to heat the pool at the community pool. It's not rocket science, and it can be done, and it saved the HOA a ton of money. If we use solar power, like that whole new neighborhood, anybody been to Babcock Ranch yet?
Yep.
It's pretty cool. They've got solar panels on all the community buildings, the health center, the workout room. They've got a whole array of solar panels out there to help support that community, and it's a green community. We can learn from that, and we can bring that home. And if we have more incentives for homeowners to have build their own, to get their own solar panels on their roofs, to help more HOAs heat their pools with geothermal energy and use wind and solar, we're going to cut back on all that greenhouse gases and those emissions that are right now just making things hotter and making things worse for us. So if we focus on those renewables, we can cut back on the speed of this climate change and the sea level rise that's going to affect us no matter what. But the longer we can put it off, the longer we can hold it off and share that knowledge with other countries, the sooner we can slow the effects of the global warming.
The choice is pretty simple. Either the age of fossil fuels is dead, or we are. So we have to transition to renewables, and we can. Can we do it today? No. Can we do it next year? No. But we can do it over a period of time. We have to leave the coal in the ground. We have to leave the oil in the ground. We have to stop burning fossil fuels. Now, we haven't seen much of Francis Rooney in this district this summer. I guess he doesn't like red tides or green or toxic algae blooms. But he did take time out of his busy schedule to write an op-ed promoting fracking, which is the last thing we need in this district. And it applies a little bit more to Collier than it does up here in Lee. But in general, that just makes the problems worse. So Florida should be the solar state, but we are not yet the solar state because the vested interests, FP&L and other big companies, have decided that they would rather make money than save our environment. So that transition can start at the federal level. We spend an enormous amount of money, billions of dollars of our money, subsidizing the fossil fuel industry. One of the most profitable industries in history, and we're giving them billions of dollars. So we've got to make the transition. And here's the thing, and they will scream and yell about it, of course, but every time we have improved our environmental standards, it has created jobs and it has created economic prosperity.
Come from a working class background, and my early years were somewhat colorful. One of the things, I worked for a little company called Halliburton. And I can tell you that the primary chemical in fracking, at least in the West Felda field, is acetic acid. That's vinegar. But it's at a strength you cannot possibly imagine. Your lungs will not allow you to breathe in that concentrated acetic acid. That's how volatile it is. That's how vile it is. It has no place in a limestone strata. Fossil fuels, we're going to have to burn them for a long time. But my belief is that we have so much money that we can start buying common shares of stock from ExxonMobil, any of the others, trading, should develop a company that I'll call American Solar, that seeds photovoltaic farms. We can offer to trade shares from ExxonMobil to American Solar. We can, through the Fed, we can buy ExxonMobil shares when they drop too low. We can buy those so that the company doesn't collapse, so that it stays healthy, with the understanding, with the stated policy that we're going to buy out the fossil fuel industry. Because we need to have them healthy, because we need the guys out on the oil rigs working until we use the last drop.
Okay, so before I get to the last question, I'm going to read something that was handed to me. We had another person that was supposed to be here, April Freeman. She's a Democrat running in Congressional District 17. The current incumbent there is Thomas Rooney. She says, I would love nothing more than to be in attendance, and my priority is and always has been to work with professionals in order to ensure a healthy and sustainable environment. She regrets that she was not here due to health issues. So I just wanted to read that out for everyone. The last question that I wanted to ask is the same last question that we had last time. I really liked it. If you do get elected, at the end of your term, what will you want to consider your greatest accomplishment?
So much to do, so little time in 2 years, which is the length of the term. I would hope that at the end of my first term, with a Democratic majority in the House and hopefully in the Senate, that we have been able to bring a spotlight through our ability to investigate and do our constitutionally required oversight of the executive branch, just who the people are running our executive government, just what their policies really mean to working people, to the folks that depend on a strong government to ensure their rights, to ensure our prosperity. And I would also hope that we will have made the case to the American people that we can elect a Democratic president who can move this country to a better place, not just financially, not just on the environment, not just on healthcare, but spiritually, so that this ugly hatred that is flowing down from the White House stops, so that the kind of violence and denigrating of people who look different than they do, that look different than we do, stops. Because this is not the America that I grew up in. This is not the America that my father fought in Germany in World War II to defend. This is not the country that we love. And so there's a spiritual component to the work that we have to do.
2 years. I'll be one of 435 representatives when I'm there. First and foremost, healthcare is my thing, right? That's why I jumped into this race. I'm an administrator for nursing homes and assisted livings and seniors I've always taken care of. I want to stop the bleeding in this healthcare system. This evisceration of the Affordable Care Act makes me shudder for the lives at risk. There are literally lives at risk. They talk about the death panels and all those things. Those things already exist with insurance companies that decide whether or not you get a treatment or you get a treatment based on their profit and loss statement. So cutting that out and getting this Medicare for all, we can get that going in 2 years. Because Medicare, anybody have Medicare in this room? Anybody want to disenroll? Anybody say, I hate my Medicare, get me off of it, I don't want it. You don't hear that at all. So if the system's already working, the system's already fine, it's got all the checks and balances in there, it's accepted universally by most of the physicians except for those concierge docs like Mr. Rooney has, then let's add more people to that system. We're going to save money and take care of everybody. Why not? Why not do that? The Koch brothers proved it already that it's going to save us money, trillions of dollars. If we cut out the middleman, negotiate the rate for those pharmaceuticals, we can do that in 2 years. We can do that even sooner because Medicare is already working. We just have to add more people to that cart and just keep it rolling along. That's one of my plans, and that's what I want to get done in those
That's
first
what
2
you
years.
want to be proud of after 2
Yes.
years.
I guess I'm probably the only Republican in the room. I want to apologize for this outright lie about this menace of the immigrant army taking American jobs. It's bull. It's not true. We're the lowest rate of unemployment that we've been at in 50 years. Every American who wants a job has a job. Nobody's taking any American jobs. And for the business sector, there are still technical jobs out there that are not being filled because you can't find anybody to fill them. So I want to apologize for that disinformation. What I want to leave as my 2-year legacy, I want the American people to get more involved with their money system and their tax system and understand what it is. Because, folks, it went over your head. There is no shortage of money. We can go to Mars, clean the environment, feed the hungry, house the homeless, without breaking a sweat. The money is there. There is no affordability issue.
All right, and with that, I guess, let's just say thanks to our candidates for being brave enough to